I want to address one of the more ludicrous pieces of state-sponsored fiction circulating in Russia's propaganda sphere, the claim published by Komsomolskaya Pravda that the European Union could launch a military attack on Russia as early as 2027. This isn't satire, or will launch a military attack. This isn't satire. It's a deliberate narrative seeded in Putin's favourite tabloid, Komsomolskaya Pravda, a warped projection that imagines NATO forces could storm Kaliningrad, Moldova will be turned into a launch pad, and Finland will plot to sack Murmansk. It's patently absurd, but dangerous nevertheless, and I want to work out why, if you give me a few minutes. Komsomolskaya Pravda lays out 3 war scenarios allegedly being cooked up in Brussels. The Kaliningrad blockade, the EU, we're told, will isolate Kaliningrad, forcing Russia to break through the Suwalki corridor. Moldova will be NATO's bridgehead, NATO allegedly planning to militarize Moldova, forcing Russia to respond with missiles and a land invasion. And Finland and NATO are supposedly going to use pre-existing Cold War infrastructure to attack St. Petersburg and Murmansk. This is interspersed in the article with calls for Russia to resume nuclear tests and suggestions that war is inevitable unless Ukraine is crushed. It's not journalism, it's war fever wrapped in tinfoil. And I want to break down why this is nonsense logically. The EU is not a military alliance, of course, first. Its primary role is economic, diplomatic and regulatory. The EU has no standing army, no collective war doctrine, no offensive ambitions, and defence falls to NATO, and NATO is explicitly defensive, not offensive. There's no strategic or moral logic in invading Russia. The EU is arming Ukraine because Ukraine was invaded, not because Brussels seeks conquest. Russia is a nuclear-armed state, and the idea that NATO strategists believe they can attack it with impunity without triggering nuclear retaliation is fantasy. Kaliningrad is not Sudetenland. No Western country disputes Russia's sovereignty over it, and no serious analyst believes an EU military corridor will run through Lithuania and Poland to get there. Moldova is not a NATO member. While Moldova is drifting westwards, it's a neutral state, and the suggestion that NATO is turning it into a staging ground is paranoia masking as global politics. Finland is a defensive member of NATO. Its accession was provoked by Russia's own aggression in Ukraine. Finland has no interest in attacking Russia. It merely wants the capacity to defend itself. So why is Moscow pushing this narrative? The fiction is not harmless. It's a calculated propaganda campaign with 3 goals. First, to justify Putin's total war economy. Russia is preparing to spend over $1 trillion on military rearmament. You don't do that unless you convince your people that war is coming and not of your own making. Secondly, to demonize the West. The narrative flips the script. Instead of being the aggressor, Russia is portrayed as the victim. Kaliningrad is the new Berlin. Moldova is the new Hungary. This is history rewritten for domestic consumption, and it paves the way, thirdly, for escalation. If Russian citizens believe war with NATO is imminent, then mobilizations, conscriptions, and preemptive strikes can be more easily justified. The real danger is not that the EU will invade Russia, it's that Russia is preparing its people for a massive new phase in its confrontation with the West, possibly a wider war of its own making. And we need to contrast the fantasy with the facts. The EU has just agreed to an 18th round of sanctions. It's not preparing for war, it's punishing aggression through economics. Most EU defence efforts go to supporting Ukraine's right to exist, not to planning a land war with a nuclear superpower. Russia is losing. It's made marginal gains at staggering costs. It now faces drone attacks inside its own borders, economic stagnation and a demoralised population. And Ukraine has not collapsed. Its people, exhausted but resolute, continue to fight because they know surrender means annihilation. And the idea that the EU could attack Russia in 2027 is not just bad analysis, it is dangerous fabrication, but it tells us something about the Kremlin's state of mind. Paranoid, vengeful, and desperate to reframe its catastrophic war as a just defence. This narrative should be seen for what it is, a false pretext. Just as Hitler used fictional attacks on German radio stations to justify invading Poland, just as he used the burning of the Reichstag to justify taking power, so too does Putin's media prepare the ground for his next act of violence. The West must not play into this fantasy, nor can it afford to ignore the signs. What begins in Komsomolskaya Pravda today may become doctrine tomorrow. So, to those reading this in Brussels, Berlin or Paris, don't laugh too hard. The lies may be absurd, but in Moscow they're deadly serious.